Welcome, nutritionradio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry, a university nutrition professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in.
Trends in Science.
Hey, everybody. Let's start with a little story. I don't know if you remember or how far back you go, but over the years I've seen artificial sweeteners come and go. The blue stuff, right? Aspartame Equal was in essentially all diet sodas for the longest time when I was in grad school. Then in the late 90s, the yellow stuff, Splenda, sucralose, came out, and I made a wholesale switch because of some of the slightly concerning things, let's just say, that I was hearing about the blue stuff, about the aspartame. Anyway, so now the yellow stuff, which I made a wholesale switch to for the longest time until stevia started getting very popular, and then I did that, right? I was just trying not to overexpose myself to these things. But because of this background, I once reached out, even on podcasts, and I would ask people in nutrition or sports nutrition settings or exercise physiology, sugar or artificial sweeteners, non-nutritive sweeteners. And many of them said sugar. And if you think about it, it's not that surprising. You might put a teaspoon or two of sugar in a cup of coffee or tea. That's a tiny fraction of what's in soda, right? Cola. But I've been hearing more and more about the sucralose, the Splenda side of things. And I just got bombarded actually with a double whammy of pieces that are about Splenda, about sucralose. And then actually a paper very recently I also was made aware of. And all these things are adding up to make me concerned, gosh, now that I overexposed myself all those years even to sucralose. Now, it's worth pointing out that the data are still pretty mixed about a lot of these things, and we have to be cautious. But let's start with this first article. This is from Carmen Leach at Lab Roots. An artificial sweetener dampens immune cell responses. So, artificial sweetener called sucralose impacts the immune system. High sucralose consumption can disrupt T cells, as reported recently in Nature. And that's a very top-tier journal. I'm sure you're probably familiar. The effects of artificial sweeteners like sucralose on humans are unclear. So I appreciate her reporting on this. In fact, Carmen Leach is my favorite among the writers at Lab Roots. But it does point out that they might have a therapeutic application for people with overactive immune systems that can trigger inflammatory or autoimmune diseases. Now, most of what I've heard is negative, and this can be seen as negative too. I mean, suppressing T cell function, that makes me worry about everything from infections to cancer surveillance or whatever. But if you have an overactive immune system, if you have autoimmune disease like my family does, this could be unique to the person. Maybe it's better for some people than for others. This is just mice. Mice were fed sucralose at high levels that corresponded to the maximum daily recommended intake set by European and American food safety authorities. So it's a lot, but it's not an absurd amount like you sometimes see in animal studies. Other types of immune cells were not affected, though. It's just the T cells in these mice. High sucralose levels influence the release of intracellular calcium when the cells are stimulated, and that has a dampening effect on the T cell's activation state. It says the doses on the animals in this study are probably still higher than those that people consume from drinks and foods that contain sucralose, and more work is needed. It's the usual, dare I say, cop-out, but caution. The authors even go on to say we do not want people to take away a message that sucralose is harmful if consumed in the course of a normal balanced diet, and the doses we used in mice would be very hard to achieve without medical intervention. And again, that was noted by study author Fabio Zani, who is a postdoctoral training fellow at Crick. So there's one, that artificial sweeteners, in this case sucralose, which is the most modern, if you will, of the non-nutritive or artificial sweeteners in this case, dampening immune response. This next one is a little bit more dramatic, if you will. This is from U.S. Right to Know. It's one of those public health consumer transparency groups. They do a pretty good job, though. This is literally posted March 29th, 2023 by Stacy Malkin. Sucralose is most widely used artificial sweetener in the U.S. Under the brand name Splenda. It's in over 6,000 food products, including diet sodas, right? I think one of the ironies here is It's often in products that are meant for weight control or carb handling, right? Sugar reduction, like for diabetes or prediabetes. And that's some of the side effects that it might actually worsen. But it's 600 times sweeter than sugar. We've known that for a long time. But that's why, if you think about it, there's so much less in those little yellow packets compared to a sugar packet. Hold up two side by side next time you're in a restaurant and shake them a little, and you'll see what I mean. There's so little in there, and it's been claimed that it's poorly absorbed and does not significantly bioaccumulate in the human body. Although this piece from US Right to Know suggests that it has been shown to do so in rats. Now, rats aren't people, right? And I've been hearing a lot of stuff about using more artificial intelligence and less as far as animal studies, but the history, like so many things of the food industry, it does have some interesting twists and turns. I would suggest you go check out this piece. Again, it's just entitled Sucralose, Emerging Science Reveals Health Risks. I don't want to take an alarmist stance here. This has been approved since 1998. Chemically, it just looks like chlorinated table sugar. Now, that is weird. You've got the little glucose and fructose molecules stuck together. That's sucrose, right? Table sugar. But they replace some of the little alcohol groups, OH groups, with chlorine atoms. Pretty weird, but it does look a lot like sugar. But there is a little lit review in this USRTK piece. Specifically of interest for me, at least in this episode, is the obesity, diabetes, weight gain, and appetite and metabolic dysfunction categories. The author points out a 2014 study in Nature that pointed to risks of consuming artificial sweeteners in general, but also sucralose specifically for diabetes patients. And again, that's a core market, right, for someone using an artificial sweetener. The paper concluded that the consumption of artificial sweeteners, quote, drives the development of glucose intolerance through induction of compositional and functional alterations in intestinal microbiota. So the mechanism seems to be souring, if you will, the gut microbiota. And this is not the only paper to do something like that, to take that stance. Here's one from Suez and colleagues, SUEZ. It's a randomized clinical trial in people. It's from the journal Cell 2022. It says non-nutritive sweeteners are commonly integrated into the human diet and presumed to be inert. However, animal studies suggest they may impact the microbiome and any downstream glycemic responses, so carb handling. They looked at 120 healthy adults. They consumed any variety of the different artificial sweeteners, right? Saccharin, sucralose, aspartame, even stevia, little sachets for 2 weeks in doses that were lower than the acceptable daily intake. They compared that with controls. Interestingly, it says, as groups, each administered a non-nutritive sweetener distinctly altered their stool and oral microbiome and plasma metabolome, whereas, here it comes, saccharin and, sucralose significantly impaired glycemic responses. And there's more than just the intestinal microbiota as far as a mechanism of action. There was a 2013 review published in the Trends in Endocrinology and Metabolism that put forth this quote, consuming sweet-tasting but non-caloric or reduced caloric food and beverages interferes with learned responses that normally contribute to glucose and energy homeostasis. So now we're crossing into this sort of behavioral, psychological, and then hormonal, metabolic kind of even keel maintenance just getting disrupted. It's like you can't have your cake and eat it too. And there are other studies along these lines. A 2020 study at Yale, published in Cell Metabolism, found that consuming 7 sucralose-sweetened beverages with, but not without, a carbohydrate over 10 days decreases insulin sensitivity in healthy human participants. So the findings here suggest that carb metabolism is altered in some way by the presence of sucralose. So to sum up with the recent news and these little lit reviews that are popping up more and more about sucralose, right? Splenda, the yellow artificial sweetener, I suggest you go take a look for yourself and then decide, is sugar in moderation better than the artificial sweetener? I personally think there's a role for both, and I'm mostly a stevia guy at this point. But let me know what you think. You can leave a comment if you want on our backup YouTube channel at It's Lawnman07. And of course, as always, if you would subscribe and leave a review on iTunes, it helps so much. And we'll see you later. The NutritionRadio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.